Imagine a world where the grass itself hides death. You step cautiously through the savanna, the sun blazing above, when suddenly the earth shifts beneath your feet. A massive shadow uncoils, scales glint, muscles ripple, and before you can react, fangs longer than your fingers strike like lightning. At 4.8 million years ago, our ancestors were not hunters, but prey. Among their most feared enemies were snakes, giant constrictors capable of crushing bone, and venomous killers whose bite could end life in minutes. They lurked in rivers, in trees, and in tall grass, waiting silently for the smallest mistake. The question is, how did fragile, defenseless apes survive in a world where snakes ruled the shadows? And why do we, even today, still carry a deep, instinctive fear of them? Before we begin, make sure to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring humanity's forgotten past back to life. 4.8 million years ago, the Earth was in the midst of the Pliocene epoch. Africa, the birthplace of humanity, was a land of contrasts, vast savannas stretching toward the horizon, rivers cutting through forests, and wetlands teeming with life. Herds of primitive zebras, antelopes, and elephants grazed under the blazing Sunday crocodiles, patrolled the waterways. Saber-toothed cats stalked the shadows, and among these dangers, snakes thrived. Unlike today, some species were truly monstrous. The shadow of Gigantopithecus, a giant constrictor stretching nearly 10 meters long, still lingered in Africa. Other snakes, smaller but no less deadly, wielded venom that could paralyze or kill in minutes. The savanna, the riverbank, and even the branches of trees concealed these silent assassins. It was into this dangerous world that our ancestors, small-bodied Australopithecus, tried to survive. Standing little more than a meter tall, they had no claws, no sharp teeth, and no weapons. Their only defenses were vigilance, numbers, and instinct. For them, every trip to the river to drink, every walk through tall grass, carried mortal risk. The presence of snakes shaped their behavior, their psychology, and even their evolution. Fear itself became a survival tool. Those who recognized the hiss, the flick of scales, or the sudden ripple in grass were the ones who lived long enough to pass on their genes. This is the story of how early humans survived in a world where snakes ruled the undergrowth. At 4.8 million years ago, Africa was alive with both abundance and danger. The Pliocene epoch had transformed the continent into a patchwork of ecosystems, sweeping grasslands, dense woodlands, winding rivers, and swampy wetlands. The land was fertile, filled with grazing herds and towering trees. But to the small-bodied hominins who lived there, beauty was inseparable from threat. Predators roamed everywhere. Saber-toothed cats lurked in the shadows, hyenas hunted in packs, and crocodiles waited at the water's edge. Yet among these familiar dangers, one enemy was unlike the others. Unlike lions or leopards, snakes gave no warning roar. Unlike hyenas, they made no sound of pursuit. Their power lay in silence. Hidden under leaves, coiled in branches, or submerged in water, they struck with terrifying speed. For an unsuspecting Australopithecus, the bite of a venomous snake or the crushing embrace of a giant constrictor meant almost certain death. Snakes thrived in this world because the environment suited them perfectly. Warm tropical temperatures provided ideal conditions for reptiles to grow large and powerful. The savannas were alive with prey rodents, birds, and young antelope, all attracting snakes in staggering numbers. Some species preferred the forests, ambushing from tree branches. Others slithered through tall grasses, invisible until it was too late. Along rivers and lakes, massive constrictors waited, their eyes just above the waterline. To early hominins, these were not isolated threats, they were constant. The danger of snakes was not just physical, it was psychological. For small apes venturing from the safety of trees onto open ground, the uncertainty was crushing. Every rustle in the grass, every flicker of movement at the riverbank could trigger panic. It meant scanning every path, listening for subtle hisses, and trusting group members to sound alarms. Fear itself became a survival mechanism. Those who feared snakes lived longer than those who didn't. This was the dangerous world of 4.8 million years ago, a land where snakes, both venomous and constricting, were silent rulers of the undergrowth. They didn't just prey on the weak, They shaped how our ancestors thought, moved, and survived. To live here was to live on the edge, one heartbeat away from a strike. When we think of snakes today, we imagine cobras, pythons, or anacondas, powerful predators, but still creatures we can measure and comprehend. 4.8 million years ago, however, the snakes that stalked Africa's forests and savannas were on another scale entirely. These were giants, remnants of an evolutionary lineage that had once produced some of the largest serpents to ever exist. The most infamous of these was Gigantopithecus garstini. Though it had first appeared millions of years earlier, its shadow lingered into the Pliocene. Stretching up to 10 meters, over 30 feet long, it was thicker than a man's torso and weighed more than half a ton. Imagine walking through tall grass and suddenly realizing the fallen log beside you was alive, muscles coiled, scales glistening, ready to strike. To small-bodied Australopithecus, encountering such a snake would have been like us stumbling upon a dragon. These constrictors killed not with venom, but with sheer strength. Their method was silent and merciless. They would ambush from concealment, sometimes high in a tree branch, other times along a riverbank, then explode forward with blinding speed. Once their jaws clamped down, the rest was inevitable. They wrapped their muscular coils around the prey, squeezing tighter with every exhale until lungs collapsed and the heart could no longer beat. For an early hominin weighing less than 40 kilograms, there was no escape. But Gigantopithecus was not alone. Africa at this time was home to massive relatives of modern pythons and boas. These snakes prowled swamps and woodlands, using both size and patience to their advantage. Some likely reached lengths of 6 or 7 meters shorter than Gigantopithecus, but still long enough to overpower almost any primate. Their preferred prey included antelopes, crocodiles, and sometimes even young elephants. If they could take down such beasts, a vulnerable ape was nothing more than an easy meal. The sheer size of these snakes created a constant threat. Unlike big cats, which roamed territories and could sometimes be avoided, giant constrictors blended seamlessly with the environment. They could remain motionless for hours, waiting for prey to pass within striking range. For hominins, this meant danger was not predictable. It could erupt anywhere beneath leaves, in trees, or by the water's edge. Archaeological evidence suggests that early apes and hominins may have frequently encountered such snakes. Fossilized remains of Gigantopithecus and large pythons overlap in time and space with early Australopithecus, placing predator and prey in the same ecosystems. Some paleontologists even argue that the constant pressure of snake predation played a role in shaping early human evolution, selecting for sharper vision, heightened awareness, and faster reaction times. To survive, our ancestors had to learn avoidance strategies. They chose safer sleeping sites, often in trees with thinner branches that could not support a giant snake's weight. They moved in groups, using alarm calls to warn of approaching danger. Yet even with these strategies, the presence of giant snakes was a force that dominated daily life. Every drink at a river, every descent from a tree, carried with it the haunting possibility of meeting one of these silent giants. The giants among snakes were more than predators. They were symbols of the environment itself, vast, dangerous, and indifferent to the fragile lives of early humans. To survive alongside them required more than luck. It demanded vigilance, cooperation, and the first sparks of intelligence that would one day define humanity. If the giant constrictors of the Pliocene ruled with brute strength, venomous snakes were masters of speed and chemistry. Their weapons were not coils but fangs, hollow needles that could deliver death in a single strike. For our ancestors 4.8 million years ago, these smaller snakes were no less terrifying than the giants. In fact, they were often far more dangerous, for they could hide in places even the sharpest eyes might miss. By this time, Africa already hosted ancestors of some of today's most lethal serpents. Early cobras slithered through savannas and woodlands, their iconic hoods perhaps less developed than modern species, but still capable of intimidating threats. Primitive vipers concealed themselves in leaf litter, perfectly camouflaged until it was too late. Even early relatives of black mambas may have been present, swift and nervous snakes, whose speed made them impossible to outrun. For a small-bodied Australopithecus, one bite could mean the end. Unlike constrictors, which suffocated their prey, venomous snakes use biochemistry to disable. Neurotoxic venoms attack the nervous system, shutting down breathing and paralyzing muscles. Hemotoxic venoms ruptured blood vessels and destroyed tissue, leading to shock and death. To a creature with no medicine, no fire, and no understanding of venom, survival after a bite was almost impossible. The threat was magnified by stealth. Constrictors were massive and easier to spot, at least in theory. Venomous snakes, however, could vanish in plain sight. A curled cobra in the grass, a viper under dry leaves, a mamba coiled in a tree hollow, each one could strike without warning. And unlike giant snakes that targeted larger prey, venomous snakes would strike defensively at anything that disturbed them. This meant that even accidental encounters, stepping too close, reaching into a hollow tree for fruit, could prove fatal. This ever-present danger shaped behavior in profound ways. Groups of Australopithecus likely developed early warning calls specifically for snakes. Many primates today, from vervet monkeys to chimpanzees, have distinct alarm calls when spotting a snake, and it is likely our ancestors did too. The ability to recognize the shape of a serpent in the grass may even explain why the human brain has a unique capacity to detect snakes faster than almost any other object. Fear of snakes is not learned, it is inherited, etched into our very biology by millions of years of encounters. Venom also introduced unpredictability. A constrictor's attack was brutal but straightforward. A venomous bite, on the other hand, might not kill immediately. Some victims suffered hours of agony before succumbing, their distress placing the whole group at risk. Others may have survived with crippling injuries, scars that served as grim reminders of what lurked in the grass. This uncertainty added a psychological weight to fear, not only of sudden death, but of suffering and vulnerability. Fossil records, though indirect, hint at this ancient arms race. Snake fossils from the Pliocene show early adaptations for venom delivery, longer fangs, more complex venom glands. At the same time, the brains of early hominins began to show increases in regions tied to vision and threat detection. It is no coincidence. Evolution was responding to an enemy as silent as it was deadly. To survive in a world filled with venomous predators, early humans had to develop more than just caution. They needed group vigilance, constant awareness, and perhaps even the beginnings of tool use, not to hunt snakes, but to keep them at a safe distance. Sticks, stones, and the courage to band together were the only defenses against fangs in the shadows. Venomous snakes were not just killers of the body, they were shapers of the mind. Their silent strikes carved fear into our DNA, a fear that still grips us today when we see the flicker of scales or hear the hiss of something hidden. For our ancestors, this fear was not irrational, it was survival. For early hominins, waterholes were both salvation and death traps. In the scorching heat of the Pliocene savannas, rivers and lakes were lifelines. Herds of antelopes, elephants, and zebras gathered there daily. Our ancestors had no choice but to do the same, for without water, survival was impossible. But every visit came with danger, and among the most silent killers at these sites were snakes. Large constrictors used the water's edge as a hunting ground. They lay submerged, eyes and nostrils barely breaking the surface. To a thirsty Australopithecus approaching cautiously, the water might appear safe until the ripple of scales betrayed a strike. With explosive force, the snake could lunge from the shallows, clamping its jaws onto an arm or leg before dragging its victim under. The struggle was over in moments, the surface closing again in silence. For the group watching from the bank, there was nothing they could do. Venomous snakes also thrived near waterholes. The tall grasses that surrounded these areas made perfect cover for vipers and cobras. An ancestor crouching to drink or searching for edible plants might find fangs flashing from the grass. The bite would come faster than the blink of an eye. Panic would spread through the troop, scattering individuals into the open, where they were exposed to other predators as well. These ambushes forced adaptations. Groups learned to approach waterholes together rather than alone. One or two individuals kept watch, scanning the banks while others drank quickly. Sticks or stones might have been tossed into the water to test for movement. Even the youngest learned caution early, for one careless moment, could doom the entire band. Evidence from modern primates offers insight into these behaviors. Baboons, for example, are extremely wary at rivers, often hesitating for long minutes before drinking. Chimpanzees approach water cautiously, scanning for movement and sometimes using tools to collect water without direct contact. It is likely our ancestors practiced similar strategies born out of repeated encounters with predators. The waterhole became a place of constant tension. It was not enough to be thirsty, one had to be vigilant. Every shadow in the grass, every ripple in the water, every sudden silence of birds could signal danger. These lessons etched themselves into memory, passed down through generations, and perhaps, in those tense moments by the water's edge, the seeds of human intelligence grew sharper. For in the presence of snakes, survival was not about strength, it was about awareness. The waterhole was a mirror of the Pliocene world itself, life-giving but always edged with death. Fear is one of humanity's oldest survival tools, and few creatures on Earth have shaped that fear more deeply than snakes. For our ancestors 4.8 million years ago, the encounter with a serpent was not just a battle of predator and prey, it was a psychological trial. Out of those ancient confrontations emerged one of the most powerful responses still hardwired into our brains today, the fear of snakes. Modern science offers clues to this legacy. Studies show that humans, even infants who have never seen a snake, react with heightened attention to snake-like shapes. Our eyes and brains detect serpents faster than almost any other object. This is not coincidence, it is the result of millions of years of selective pressure. Those who recognize the subtle flicker of scales in the grass or the curve of a coiled body were more likely to survive. Those who failed often never lived long enough to pass on their genes. Fear itself became an evolutionary inheritance. For Australopithecus, fear was constant and unavoidable. A rustle in the leaves could mean a harmless lizard or a cobra ready to strike. A branch shifting above might be just the wind or a massive python waiting to drop. The uncertainty created a state of constant vigilance. Every sense was sharpened. The eyes scanned the ground, the ears tuned to the faintest hiss, the body tensed for sudden movement. Living in this heightened state carried stress, but it also saved lives. Fear also became social. When one member of a group spotted a snake, they reacted instantly, screeches, arm waving, or rapid retreat. This response warned others and spread like wildfire through the troop. Over time, alarm calls specific to snakes likely developed, much like those observed in vervet monkeys today. Fear was not just individual, it was collective, binding groups together in shared survival. But fear did more than trigger escape. It taught avoidance. Certain places became danger zones, tall grasses, hollow logs, at riverbanks at dusk. Groups learned to skirt these areas or approach with extreme caution. Youngsters were taught through observation. Those who ignored warnings often paid the price. Slowly, behaviors shaped by fear became traditions, passed across generations long before formal culture existed. This constant pressure may even have influenced the architecture of the human brain. The amygdala, the region that processes fear, became finely tuned to snake-like stimuli. The ability to freeze, flee, or fight at a moment's notice was honed through endless encounters. In this sense, snakes were teachers as much as threats, sculpting the reflexes and instincts that remain with us today. The fear response also carried a paradox. While it saved lives, it could also cause mistakes. A sudden overreaction, a panicked dash into open ground, a stumble into a predator's path sometimes cost more than it saved. Survival depended not only on fear, but on the ability to manage it. Those who balanced caution with control lived longer. This balance between fear and reason became one of the earliest sparks of intelligence. The ability to pause, assess, and choose wisely under pressure. Even now, millions of years later, the echo remains. Few animals trigger the same visceral reaction as snakes. Our pulse quickens, our skin crawls, our breath shortens. We may live in cities, far from savannas and rivers, but the fear response lingers, a whisper from the past, reminding us of the battles our ancestors fought in the grasslands of Africa. Fear, then, was not weakness, it was survival embodied. For the fragile apes of 4.8 million years ago, the fear of snakes was not an obstacle, it was their shield, and without it, humanity's story might have ended before it even began. For early hominins, survival in a land filled with deadly snakes required more than fear. Fear alone could freeze the body. What kept our ancestors alive were the strategies they developed to live with constant danger. At 4.8 million years ago, Australopithecus and their kin had no weapons of metal, no fire to ward off predators, and no knowledge of antivenom. Yet, they endured, and they did so by adapting their behavior in ways that echo through primates and even humans today. 1. Living in groups. One of the most effective defenses was strength in numbers. A single Australopithecus wandering alone through tall grass was vulnerable, but a group of 10 or 20 had many eyes and ears scanning for threats. When one member spotted a snake, the alarm spread, instantly calls, screeches, and frantic gestures. This collective vigilance reduced the chance of surprise. It also allowed them to mob smaller snakes, driving them away with noise, stones, or sticks. 2. Choosing safe sleeping sites night brought new dangers. Giant constrictors often hunted after dusk, using cover of darkness to approach silently. To counter this, groups likely chose sleeping sites with care. Thin branched trees provided safety, as large snakes could not easily climb without breaking branches. Sleeping off the ground, clustered together, reduced the risk of ambush. Fossil evidence suggests many early hominins had curved fingers and strong arms well suited for climbing, traits that may have doubled as snake defenses by keeping them out of reach during the most dangerous hours. 3. Vigilance at water sources. Because waterholes were snake ambush zones, our ancestors developed routines to minimize risk. They approached water cautiously, often as a group. Some may have thrown sticks or stones into the shallows to test for movement. Others stayed back as lookouts while the rest drank quickly. Over time, these practices became ingrained behaviors, instinctive rules of survival passed to the next generation. 4. Using tools as weapons. Even before the age of stone tools, sticks and branches were within reach. Modern primates use sticks to fend off snakes, and it is almost certain Australopithecus did the same. A long branch created distance, keeping fangs away from vulnerable flesh. Sharp stones, when thrown, could injure or at least drive away smaller snakes. These were not yet weapons of hunting, but of survival rudimentary tools wielded in desperate defense. 5. Teaching the young. Perhaps the most important strategy was education. Young members of the group learned by watching. When elders shrieked at the sight of a snake or refused to enter tall grass, juveniles absorbed the lesson. Those who ignored the warning often suffered the consequences. Over generations, this snake knowledge became part of culture. Long before fire, art, or language, the first form of teaching may have been simple: beware the snake. 6. Harnessing fear itself. Fear was not only a reflex but also a guide. It kept hominins cautious in dangerous zones, alert at riverbanks, and wary in tall grass. Rather than suppressing fear, our ancestors learned to live with it, channeling vigilance into survival. Fear sharpened their senses, kept them together, and pushed them to innovate. Together, these strategies formed a fragile but effective defense. Snakes were never eliminated as threats. They remained constant, coiled in the background of daily life. But with cooperation, caution, and the first stirrings of tool use, early humans endured. It was in these struggles that the seeds of intelligence were sown. The very strategies that kept snakes at bay also laid the foundation for human problem-solving, group living, communication, teaching, and tool use. In fighting snakes, our ancestors were also building the skills that would one day make them masters of the world. For millions of years, early humans had little to defend themselves with except sharp eyes and quick reflexes. But by 4.8 million years ago, something extraordinary was beginning to happen. Our ancestors, though small and fragile, started to realize that the world around them could be shaped into weapons. Against snakes, silent killers armed with venom and coils, this realization became a matter of life and death. The earliest weapons. The first tools were not crafted but chosen. A fallen branch, a heavy stone, a thorny stick, each could become a weapon when wielded with purpose. Fossil evidence suggests that even before the widespread use of stone flakes, early Australopithecus likely used sticks to probe grass, scare predators, or strike at snakes. Modern chimpanzees are known to pick up branches to beat at snakes or throw rocks in defense, and it is reasonable to believe our ancestors behaved similarly. Creating distance. The greatest danger of a snake was its reach. Venomous snakes could strike in less than a second, while constrictors relied on getting close enough to wrap their coils. Tools provided what the body lacked: distance. A stick allowed a hominin to push grass aside safely, to prod a suspicious log, or to keep a striking snake at arm's length. A rock thrown with force could drive a snake away, buying time to escape. This was the birth of strategy, using the environment not just to survive, but to fight back. The spark of intentional tool use. Over time, mere use became innovation. A stick might be sharpened by gnawing or scraping, turning it into a crude spear. Stones could be struck together, flaking sharp edges that cut or pierced. Though simple, these were revolutionary steps. For the first time, fragile apes were no longer entirely at the mercy of their predators. The world of snakes had forced them to invent, to see possibility in wood and stone. Snake encounters as teachers. It is easy to imagine the scene. A small group gathered in. Panic as a cobra raised its hood. Some shrieked and fled, but one individual grabbed a branch and struck. The snake recoiled, hissing, then slithered into the grass. In that moment, a lesson was learned, not just by the brave one, but by all who watched. Tools worked. Fear could be met with action. That lesson, repeated countless times, became part of the culture of survival. From defense to offense, though snakes were rarely hunted, defending against them may have inspired broader uses of tools. If a stick could keep a snake away, perhaps it could knock fruit from a high branch. If a stone could drive off danger, perhaps it could also crack a nut. In this way, the war against snakes indirectly pushed our ancestors toward greater intelligence, creativity, and control over their environment. The legacy of tool snakes forced our ancestors to extend their bodies beyond flesh and bone. The stick became an arm, the stone became a fist, and eventually, fire itself would become a weapon of dominance. But the roots of this legacy may lie in the moments when fragile Australopithecus stood their ground against fangs in the grass. In defending themselves, they discovered the first whispers of technology. For snakes, tools meant that prey was no longer helpless. For humans, tools meant the dawn of possibility. It was not victory yet. Snakes remained deadly for millions of years to come, but the balance of power had begun to shift. Predators do more than kill. They shape the lives of those they hunt, forcing adaptations, behaviors, and even the evolution of mind. At 4.8 million years ago, snakes were among the most constant threats to our ancestors. Their attacks left scars, both physical and psychological, but they also carved lessons into the very fabric of what it meant to be human. Lesson 1. Awareness saves lives. Every snake encounter reinforced the value of vigilance. Those who noticed the subtle shift in grass, the glint of scales in sunlight, or the faint hiss beneath leaves were the ones who survived. Over time, awareness became instinct. Our ancestors developed sharper eyesight and quicker recognition patterns. Today, modern humans still detect snake shapes faster than most objects, a legacy of this ancient training ground. Awareness was not optional. It was survival written into biology. Lesson 2. Fear is a teacher, not a weakness. Fear of snakes was not a hindrance, it was protection. The jolt of adrenaline, the racing heart, the urge to flee, all prepared the body to survive. This fear response was so effective that it was passed through generations, hardwired into the nervous system. Modern humans may live far from savannas, yet the sight of a snake still sparks unease. This universal fear is proof that what once terrified also preserved. Our ancestors learned that fear, when heeded, was wisdom. Lesson 3. Cooperation is stronger than teeth. Predators isolated the weak, but snakes taught the power of groups. A lone Australopithecus faced almost certain death from a constrictor or venomous strike, but in groups they could spot snakes faster, mob smaller ones, and protect the vulnerable. This cooperation extended beyond snakes to all predators, laying the foundation for the social bonds that define humanity. Survival against fangs was never a solo act. It was a chorus of watchfulness, alarm calls, and shared defense. Lesson 4. Tools multiply strength. Snake. Predation drove innovation. When fangs threatened flesh, sticks and stones became extensions of the body. At first, this was reactionary, hurling a rock in panic, brandishing a branch in fear. But repetition turned into recognition. our ancestors learned that tools could change outcomes. Each snake encounter became a lesson. Bare hands were weak, but wood and stone gave power. Without snakes pressing them into creativity, perhaps tool use would have come later or differently. Lesson 5. Risk and reward. Define survival. Snake-rich zones often overlapped with vital resources. Waterholes provided hydration but hid ambushes. Fruit trees shaded by tall grasses might conceal vipers. To survive, hominins learned to weigh risk against necessity. This calculation when to approach, when to avoid, was an early form of decision-making. It was not instinct alone, it was strategy. In facing snakes, our ancestors sharpened the mental skills of choice, judgment, and foresight. Lesson 6. Death leaves. Knowledge behind every loss to a snake was a tragedy, but it also taught the group. A juvenile struck down while reaching into a hollow tree taught others to stay clear. A band ambushed at a river learned new caution at water's edge. Pain, grief, and observation became teachers. The dead did not die in vain. Their fates etched warnings into memory, passed down in behaviors that ensured survival for others. Lesson 7. Predators shape identity. Finally, snakes taught humans something deeper, that survival was not guaranteed. Living in constant threat forged resilience and humility. Early hominins were reminded daily that they were not rulers of their world, but fragile beings clawing for existence in a landscape of giants. This identity, forged in hardship, may be why humans carry both fear and reverence for snakes in myth, religion, and culture even today. In the end, snakes were not only predators, they were sculptors. Their fangs carved vigilance into our eyes, fear into our nerves, cooperation into our groups, and tools into our hands. They transformed fragile apes into problem solvers and risk calculators. Each ambush was brutal, but each survival carried forward lessons that shaped the destiny of humanity. Without snakes, we might not be who we are. The story of our ancestors' struggle against snakes did not end on the savannas of Africa. It continues to echo within us, stitched into our biology, psychology, and even our cultures. What began as a fight for survival 4.8 million years ago has left traces that still guide our behavior today. The reflex of fear modern humans are far removed from the daily dangers of venomous ambushes. Yet the moment a snake slithers into sight, something ancient awakens. Studies show that humans detect snake shapes faster than almost any other object. Even children, with no prior exposure, recoil instinctively. This isn't learned, it's inherited. It is the echo of countless generations who survived because they feared. The chill down the spine, the pounding heart, the frozen moment before retreat, these are not modern reactions. They are ancestral warnings resurfacing in the present. Myths of serpents across civilizations. As humanity spread across the world, snakes slithered into myth and legend. In Mesopotamia, they symbolized danger and wisdom. In India, cobras became sacred guardians. In Mesoamerican cultures, the feathered serpent was revered as a god. Even in the Bible, the serpent took on the role of tempter, embodying humanity's oldest fears. These myths did not emerge from imagination alone, they were cultural memory. They were echoes of real dangers faced by fragile apes on ancient plains. Fear was given shape, and reverence gave it meaning. The balance of fear and fascination. What is remarkable is not only fear, but fascination. Humans do not only run from snakes, they study, hunt, and even keep them. This paradox, being drawn toward what once terrified us, is another echo. For our ancestors, knowing a predator meant survival. Curiosity was as essential as fear. To understand a snake's patterns, its hunting style, its hiding places, was to reduce its threat. Today, herpetologists and snake charmers carry that same ancient impulse. Knowledge conquers. Danger. Survival strategies in modern behavior. The lessons snakes forced on our ancestors manifest in subtle ways even now. People naturally tread carefully in tall grass, avoid reaching into dark holes, and hesitate at murky water's edge. These are not random quirks, they are survival codes inherited across millennia. Even urban dwellers in high-rise apartments feel an instinctive unease at the hiss of air or the sudden slither of movement in shadows. The past whispers in our reactions, guiding us away from risks that no longer exist, but once decided life or death. Snakes in language and symbolism echoes also live in language. Phrases like snake in the grass, venomous words, and slithering betrayal all reflect a cultural memory of danger. Snakes became metaphors for hidden threats, treachery, and fear. Yet they also symbolize healing. The rod of Asclepius, entwined with a serpent, still represents medicine today. Why? Because snakes also embodied renewal, shedding skin, surviving, and adapting. Just as our ancestors did, the snake became both destroyer and teacher, death and life, danger and wisdom. Evolutionary gifts carried forward. Perhaps the most profound echo is how snakes indirectly shaped our evolution. Their constant presence rewarded sharper vision, faster reflexes, and keener awareness. They drove cooperation and communication. Early warning calls, gestures, and shared vigilance became survival tools. They even pushed tool use, sticks to probe grass, stones to strike, fire to keep danger at bay. Each adaptation carved by snakes was passed forward, layer by layer, until fragile apes became human beings. We are their living legacy. The snake and the human psyche. Deep down, the human psyche still wrestles with the serpent. Dreams of snakes remain common across cultures, often symbolizing fear, temptation, or hidden power. Psychologists interpret them as reflections of primal anxieties. Shamans and mystics view them as messengers from an ancient world. In every interpretation, the echo is clear. Snakes are more than animals. They are archetypes rooted in our evolutionary journey. From survival to mastery today, humanity has reached a strange turning point. What once was our predator now lies behind glass in zoos, studied in labs, or worshipped in temples. The deadliest serpents can still kill, but they no longer dominate us. We have antivenom, medicine, and knowledge. Yet the ancient echo remains. The sight of a snake still makes the heart race, the body flinch, and the mind sharpen. It is a reminder that mastery is built on millions of years of survival. Why these echoes matter? To dismiss these echoes as mere relics is to overlook their importance. They are not just fears, they are foundations. Every step humans took away from the trees, across open savannas, and into the wider world was shadowed by predators. Snakes were among the most persistent. Their legacy is why we are alert, why we fear, why we plan, and why we endure. They helped forge the resilience that carried humanity through storms, predators, and extinctions. Even now, when most of us will never face a deadly bite, the snake lives on within us, in reflexes, in language, in myth, in memory. They are proof that survival is not only about defeating danger, it is about carrying its lessons forward. The hiss in the grass may no longer mean death, but its echo ensures we never forget where we came from. The story of 4.8 million years ago is not only about snakes, it is about us. Imagine those fragile bands of Australopithecus standing barely a meter tall, clutching sticks and stones, staring into the grass where death waited in silence. Every hiss in the dark, every ripple at the river, every shadow across the savannah forced them to make a choice: fight, flee, or adapt. They were not strong. They had no claws, no fangs, no scales to shield them, and yet they endured. Because survival was never about strength alone, it was about awareness, cooperation, and the courage to face a world designed to erase them. Each encounter with a predator left behind more than scars. It left behind instincts, behaviors, and lessons that shaped the very core of humanity. Snakes, in their silent patience, became teachers. They taught our ancestors vigilance, strategy, and the importance of staying together. They sharpened our vision, trained our reflexes, and gave us the fear that still keeps us alive today. Without them, perhaps the fragile ape on the savannah would never have become the human being who now tells their story. So when you see a snake today behind glass, in a field, or even in your dreams, remember this: they were once our greatest enemies and also the shapers of our destiny. They are part of the reason you exist at all. Because survival is not about defeating every danger, it is about carrying forward the lessons that danger gives. And from the deadliest snake attacks of the ancient world, humanity carried forward the instincts and resilience that allowed us to survive storms, predators, and the harshest tests of nature. And now, it's your turn. If this journey into our ancestors' struggle fascinated you, hit that like button. It tells us you want more stories from the dawn of humanity. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do snakes still terrify you, or do you see them as teachers of survival? And don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because the story of human survival is far from over and the next chapter is coming soon. This is not just history, it's our origin story, and it has only just begun.